The fried liver attack begins with the moves pawn to e4, pawn to e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to c4, entering the Italian game. For the fried liver attack to be executed, black must play knight to f6. In response, white plays knight to g5, initiating the fried liver attack. The key is black's move knight to f6, as the attack is only possible if this specific move is played. If black chooses alternative moves, the sequence leading to the fried liver attack cannot be achieved. For example, if black plays moves like bishop to c5, bishop to e7, pawn to h6, pawn to d6, or any other move, we cannot play knight to g5 because the queen will still be defending the g5 square. However, when black plays knight to f6, the queen no longer protects the g5 square, allowing us to jump our knight to g5 and launch the fried liver attack. This move puts pressure on black and threatens to capture the pawn on f7. The only effective way for black to defend is by pushing the pawn to d5, blocking the bishop's diagonal. If black plays a move like bishop to e7 instead, it doesn't help because we can still capture the pawn on f7 regardless. Therefore, black must play pawn to d5 to block the bishop's attack. At this point, we capture the pawn on d5, and black will likely recapture it as well. At first glance, your opponent might think their position is secure. The queen now attacks our knight, and the black bishop covers the f7 square, making it seem as though the f7 pawn is well protected. However, in this position, we begin by sacrificing our knight with knight takes f7. Black is forced to recapture the knight, otherwise we can easily threaten the queen, the rook, and create significant pressure. Once the king takes f7, we take advantage of a powerful pin using our bishop on the knight. This pin is the central theme of our strategy in this game. Next, we play queen to f3, delivering a check while simultaneously attacking the knight on d5. As you can see, we now have two pieces targeting the knight on d5. Black tries to move their king to the corner to escape the check, but our position remains dominant. For example, if black plays king to g8, it leads to a forced checkmate in just a few moves. We play bishop captures the knight, leaving black's king with no legal moves. Black is then forced to sacrifice the queen to capture back. Afterward, the only option is to block with the bishop, which we capture, delivering checkmate. The game is over. To avoid this, black must move the king up the center of the board to e6, protecting the knight on d5. Any other move, such as king to another square, allows us to simply capture the knight with our bishop, threatening checkmate on f7. If black attempts to block with the queen by playing queen to f6, we capture the knight on d5 with check, leaving black unable to defend effectively. Moving the knight would be an illegal move since it's pinned by our bishop. Similarly, the king is also restricted due to the pin. As a result, black is forced to move the king up to e6 to protect the knight on d5. At this point, we play knight to c3, adding another attacker to pressure the knight on d5. Black has two key defensive options to protect the knight. Knight to e7. This is actually the second most popular line. Knight to b4. This move is considered the main line. Let's first examine knight to e7. By retreating the knight, black limits their own piece activity. The knight blocks the development of the bishop and also restricts the queen's mobility. In response, we play pawn to d4. The idea behind this move is to provoke black into capturing the pawn. This exchange opens up the e-file, allowing us to launch additional checks on the king later. It's a strategic concept we'll explore further in subsequent variations. If black tries to defend the knight on d5 with knight to b4, we can simply castle and then bring our rook to e1 to deliver a check. In this position, black might attempt to reinforce the d5 square with pawn to c6, which is another common defensive idea, as we'll see in other variations involving knight to b4. At this point, we capture the pawn on e5, creating significant pressure. Black faces a tough position here, as most of their pieces are tied up and unable to contribute effectively. For example, king takes e5 is an unattractive option for black, as it would bring their king further into the center of the board, leaving it even more vulnerable. Additionally, black's light-squared bishop remains inactive, further limiting their ability to develop and defend. Playing pawn to c6 would block the queen from defending the knight on d5, so let's explore another scenario. Suppose black plays pawn to b5, attacking our bishop. In response, we simply retreat the bishop. Black might then try pawn to a5, aiming to trap our bishop. Here, we have a strong move, bishop to g5. This creates a second pin, as our bishop now pins the knight to the enemy queen. With this setup, white's position becomes overwhelmingly dominant. On the next move, we can castle queenside, adding a third pin with the rook targeting the queen. At this point, black's position is completely collapsing. Now, instead of playing pawn to c6, let's see what happens if black captures our pawn on d4. With our knight under attack, we simply capture black's knight on d5. After black recaptures, the e-file becomes open, allowing us to play queen to e4 check. At this point, black's king is forced to move to the right side because moving to d7, for example, leads to a quick checkmate. If black blocks the check with the bishop, we respond with queen to f5 check. Whether the king moves to e8 or e7, we follow up with queen to f7 checkmate. If the king moves to c6, we deliver checkmate with queen to b5 check. Alternatively, if black's king moves to d6, we capture the knight with check. When the king retreats, we play bishop to g5 check, forcing black to lose their queen on the next move. This is why the king cannot move to the left side and is forced to go right. From there, we capture the pawn with check, continuing to push the king away from the center. Finally, we recapture the knight, restoring material balance. Despite being only a pawn up, this position leaves us in a commanding lead. Thanks to our earlier knight sacrifice on f7. Due to the weak position of black's king, castling is no longer an option, leaving the king exposed and in constant danger. This creates a position that is relatively easy for us to play. These are some of the key lines when black plays knight to e7 to defend the knight on d5. Before we explore the main line with knight to b4, now, let's take a look at what happens if black defends the knight with knight to b4. This move threatens to capture on c2 with check, forking our rook on a1. To counter this, we simply castle. Black is then likely to play pawn to c6, attempting to bring in extra defenders for the knight on d5. In response, we push pawn to d4, using the same idea of opening the e-file to launch an attack on black's vulnerable king. If black plays knight takes c2, they aim to prevent our rook from moving to e1, attack our rook on a1, and potentially capture our pawn on d4. At first glance, this seems like a strong move for black. However, we respond by capturing the pawn on e5. This pawn capture may appear bold, as it sacrifices another rook after knight takes a1, leaving us down a rook and a knight. But if you look closely, the evaluation clearly favors white. Despite being materially behind, our position is completely winning. So, how do we capitalize on this? We play knight takes d5, forcing black to recapture. Then, we bring our rook into play with rook to d1, adding pressure on the pawn at d5. At this point, black is in a tough spot. They cannot capture our bishop, as doing so would result in losing their queen. If black attempts to develop their bishop with a move like bishop to e7, the position quickly falls apart due to our overwhelming attack. Now, we simply capture the pawn with rook takes d5, and this position is completely lost for black. On the next move, we can reposition the rook while simultaneously threatening the queen. Moreover, the game concludes with a checkmate on the very next move. Thanks for watching this breakdown of the powerful Freief liver attack. I hope you found this strategy both exciting and insightful for your games.